Let me start with a question that sounds simple, almost childish, but it exposes a massive lie at the center of the modern job market. How exactly are you supposed to get work experience? If every entry-level job requires 3 to 5 years of experience? Because that's not a vibe. That's not TikTok whining. That's not a Gen Z entitlement issue. That's data. According to LinkedIn's analysis of millions of job postings, about 38% of jobs labeled entry-level require 3 to 5 years of prior experience, and in some sectors like manufacturing and software services, that number jumps above 50%. And here's the kicker, nearly 90% of employers openly admit they avoid hiring recent graduates, while at the same time claiming they can't find talent. So we're not dealing with a skills shortage. We're dealing with a pipeline collapse. To understand how broken this is, you have to understand what entry-level jobs were supposed to be. For most of modern American history, roughly from World War II through the late 1970s, entry-level jobs served a very clear function. They were training positions. Companies hired people without experience, sometimes without college degrees, and trained them internally. Promotions were expected. Loyalty was rewarded. Careers were built inside organizations. In fact, during that post-war boom, roughly 90% of corporate vacancies were filled internally through promotion or lateral movement. You were hired for attitude, not credentials. For potential, not polish. And companies did this because they were playing a long game. They expected to exist in 10, 20, 30 years, so investing in workers made economic sense. Starting in the late 1970s and early 1980s, something fundamental shifted in American capitalism. Corporate America moved from what economists call retain and reinvest to downsize and distribute. The corporate language translation is less training, fewer pensions, more stock buybacks, and more short-term profit pressure. At the same time, the U.S. began rapid deindustrialization. Between 1980 and 2009, the United States lost over 7 million manufacturing jobs, roughly 38% of its manufacturing base. Those jobs weren't just paychecks, they were career ladders. They were how people without elite credentials built stable lives. When those disappeared, entry-level pathways collapsed with them. And here's where things get insidious. Instead of rebuilding training pipelines, companies quietly shifted the burden onto individuals. Come pre-trained. Bring experience. Figure it out yourself. This is where the college degree myth comes in. College didn't become the default requirement because jobs suddenly became more intellectual. It became the default because employers needed a filter. By the 1980s and 1990s, companies were flooded with applicants, especially as manufacturing declined and white-collar work became more competitive. So instead of training workers, companies outsourced screening to universities. Degree equals pre-filtered labor. But even that wasn't enough. By the early 2000s, companies were already saying, okay, you have a degree, but where's your experience? Which raises the obvious question, where was that experience supposed to come from? This is where internships exploded. In 1992, only 17% of college students had ever done an internship. By 2008, that number had jumped to over 80%. And a shocking portion of those were unpaid. By 2022, 47% of internships in the US were unpaid, despite clear evidence that paid interns receive significantly more job offers after graduation. So let's be honest about what happened. Companies externalized training costs. Universities became credential factories. Students paid tuition to work for free. And if you couldn't afford unpaid labor? Too bad. You were filtered out. This isn't meritocracy. This is class gating. Now let's talk about the modern hiring machine. Online job boards didn't just make hiring easier, they made it inhuman. Before platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed, hiring was slow, local, and personal. You met people. You talked. You judged potential. Now, one click equals one application. Thousands pour in. No human can process them. So companies respond rationally, but destructively. They add experience requirements that aren't actually necessary. They deploy applicant tracking systems, ATS, to auto-reject resumes. They outsource recruiting to third-party firms who don't understand the job. According to a joint Harvard Business School and Accenture study, 88% of employers admit their own systems reject qualified candidates, and that figure rises to 94% for middle-skill workers. Read that again. Employers know the system filters out good people, and they keep using it anyway. Why? Because volume matters more than quality. The paradox hits young workers the hardest. Now zoom in on the human cost. As of 2025, unemployment among recent college graduates sits well above the national average, the largest gap in 40 years. For workers aged 20 to 24, unemployment is around 8.6%, compared to roughly 4% overall. And those who do find jobs? Over 50% are underemployed, working in roles that don't require a degree, while carrying an average of $33,000 in student debt. This isn't a temporary glitch. The Federal Reserve calls this economic scarring. Enter the labor market during a broken period, and your earnings suffer for decades. Graduates entering after the 2008 crisis earned up to 9% less for more than 10 years. We're setting up the same outcome again. Just as entry-level work was already collapsing, automation kicked the ladder out entirely. Customer service, data entry, scheduling, junior analysis, basic content work. These were stepping stone jobs. Now they're being handed to software. According to Goldman Sachs, up to 300 million jobs globally are exposed to AI disruption. And employers expect nearly a quarter of all roles to change significantly within 5 years. So companies pause hiring. Graduate job postings dropped about 33% in a single year, according to Indeed. Not because young people disappeared, but because companies are waiting to see if they can replace you with code. Here's the structural problem nobody wants to say out loud: you cannot build a workforce shaped like a diamond. You can't have executives at the top, a fat middle, and no entry point at the bottom. Because if you don't train people now, you don't have seniors later. Even executives admit this privately. Law firms, accounting firms, engineering firms. They're cutting junior roles, while quietly panicking about who replaces a workforce with an average age in the mid-50s. If you don't hire people now, your company doesn't exist in 15 years. So why is the blame still falling on young people? This is the most frustrating part. Despite all of this, the public narrative is still, they're lazy, they lack soft skills, they don't want to work. Yes, some people are lazy. Every generation has them. But laziness does not explain system-wide failure across decades, industries, and technologies. What's actually happening is simpler and uglier. Instead of fixing hiring practices, instead of rebuilding training pipelines, instead of admitting the system is broken, it's easier to blame the people being crushed by it. So if the data is this clear, if the entry-level ladder is objectively broken, if companies admit their own systems reject qualified people, then the obvious question is, why hasn't anything changed? Why do we keep hearing the same talking points every decade? Why does a 1983 New York Times article, a 2008 CBS report, and a 2025 Forbes analysis all say the exact same thing? Because the modern hiring system is no longer designed to hire efficiently. It's designed to absorb risk, hoard options, and shift responsibility downward. Let's talk about something job seekers feel instinctively but rarely see confirmed. Ghost jobs. These are job postings that are never intended to be filled, stay open for months, or are quietly reposted again and again. From the outside, it looks like companies are desperate for talent. From the inside, something else is happening. Companies want candidate databases. They want resumes. They want data. They want optionality. Recruiters openly admit this when pressed. The problem with changing hiring practices, removing ATS filters, lowering experience requirements, interviewing humans again, is not quality. It's quantity. Any reform that makes hiring more humane dramatically reduces the number of applicants. And corporations don't want fewer applicants. They want leverage. They want to believe that somewhere in that pile of 1,000 resumes is a unicorn who needs no training, accepts below market pay, produces immediately, and leaves quietly if replaced. That candidate almost never exists. But the illusion keeps the system running. This is one of the most cynical dynamics in the modern labor market. According to surveys cited in your materials, 98% of companies say they're struggling to find talent, while 89% of HR leaders say they actively avoid hiring recent graduates. Those two statements cannot both be true, unless the definition of talent has become completely detached from reality. What employers really mean is, we want someone fully trained, perfectly aligned, instantly productive, but we don't want to pay or train for it. So instead of fixing hiring logic, companies expand filters, more experience, more credentials, more software screening, and more outsourcing. And then they blame the labor market for not delivering miracles. The automation trap is the part executives don't like to say out loud. Yes, AI can replace tasks, but it cannot replace career formation. Most professions used to rely on repetition: junior lawyers reading documents, analysts cleaning data, assistants scheduling meetings, and interns doing grunt work. That work wasn't valuable because it was efficient. It was valuable because it trained judgment. Now, companies are handing those tasks to software and congratulating themselves on short-term efficiency. But what happens next? Who becomes senior when no one was junior? Even firms that fully embrace AI admit this is dangerous. Law firms, accounting firms, engineering consultancies, all face the same problem. If you stop hiring at the bottom, your talent pipeline collapses at the top. Several executives interviewed in your materials openly warned, if we don't hire people now, the company won't exist in 15 years. And yet, they're still cutting entry-level roles. Because short-term metrics beat long-term survival, at least until it's too late. Here's the analogy that perfectly captures modern hiring. Hiring managers today behave like extremely attractive people on dating apps. They swipe endlessly. Thousands of options. No urgency. No commitment. Eventually they get tired, close the app, and go home, not to a soulmate, but to a skeleton crew, automation, outsourcing, and burnout. Then they complain, nobody good is out there. But abundance doesn't create better decisions. It creates indecision. And that indecision is why entry-level hiring freezes keep happening year after year. It is also a class signal nobody talks about. Here's something uncomfortable, but true. Not all experience is treated equally. A college student who interns unpaid at a prestigious firm? That's initiative. A student who works retail or food service to survive? That's lack of focus. Even though the second student likely learned time management, stress tolerance, customer communication, and reliability, their resume often triggers automatic rejection. Why? Because ATS systems and recruiters use experience as a class signal, not a skill signal. And this creates a brutal feedback loop. Unpaid internships reward those with family support, paid survival jobs penalize those without it, and entry-level becomes a gated club. This is how inequality quietly reproduces itself, without anyone saying a word. The psychological impact of this system is enormous. According to surveys cited in your materials, only 29% of Gen Z workers feel engaged at work. Nearly half feel pessimistic about their professional future. Over 60% expect to string together temporary or gig jobs before stability arrives. This isn't laziness. This is learned helplessness. When every application results in automated rejection, when every job asks for experience you can't get, when even internships are disappearing. Motivation doesn't disappear because people are weak. It disappears because the system offers no feedback loop that rewards effort. Why just apply more is actively bad advice. One of the most important, and counterintuitive, conclusions from your materials is this: job platforms are no longer designed to get you hired. They are designed to maximize application volume, collect data, feed algorithms, and justify HR software budgets. Applying to hundreds of jobs online often hurts candidates by burying them deeper in ATS systems, reinforcing automated rejections, and wasting emotional energy. This is why so many people report the same experience. I applied to 50, 80, 100 jobs, and heard nothing. Because the system isn't broken. It's indifferent. So what actually works now? This is the uncomfortable truth. The modern labor market no longer rewards volume, obedience, and credential stacking. It rewards human visibility. That means personal networks, direct communication, small communities, and niche credibility. It means fewer applications, but more conversations. It means stepping outside the platforms. Not because networking is fair, but because it bypasses the machinery designed to filter you out. This isn't a youth issue. This is a system sustainability issue. A society that eliminates training, outsources responsibility, automates entry points, and blames individuals, eventually runs out of capable professionals. You can't outsource a civilization's skill formation. You can't automate social trust. And you can't shame an entire generation into fixing structural failure. Entry-level jobs didn't disappear overnight. They were slowly hollowed out, by short-term thinking, by financialization, by technology deployed without responsibility. What we're seeing now is not the beginning of a crisis. It's the delayed consequence of decisions made 40 years ago. And until companies relearn a basic truth, hiring for attitude and training for skill is not charity. It's survival. This problem will keep repeating itself. Not just for Gen Z, but for everyone who comes after them.